Hi, Chantal. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, great, thank you. And it was so fantastic to be speaking to you today. So thank you very much for taking the time.
Yeah, I'm so happy to. I'm sitting in my hotel room in Toronto, so
Wow. Oh, it's wonderful to be talking. I've been a fan of your work for a while, but to be talking about this film in particular because I had such a great time with it. But I am curious, when a project like this comes your way, what is it about a role like Jamie that really jumps out at you and makes you want to get involved?
there were a few factors. I mean, the first thing I did was read the script and instantly, obviously, the story's not about Jamie, but it's about different people's perspective of who her brother was. So to be able to tell that slice of the pie was really interesting to me, the family dynamic, the nuanced complexity of loving somebody who's done the worst possible thing that you could ever imagine. And the fallout from that and the disappearance like of their own father and then the disappearance of her brother, like there's this tiny little window into each person's lens, like through their lens, that we get to see who he was and how he was seen in the world. And that's really interesting to me. And then after speaking with Matthew, the writer director of it, and realizing that our ideas were quite aligned, and then knowing that Tom and Ryan and Jackie and all sorts of incredible actors were attached to it, it felt like a place where I knew I was going to be able to creatively spar with really wonderful actors, and that's always exciting.
Oh, fantastic. And I know as soon as I finished watching the film, I think like a lot of people, I started jumping on Wikipedia and YouTube and trying to read more about this case. And I know Jamie spoke to the press last year for the first time, but is she someone that you got to speak to? And even if you didn't, were those videos of any use to you to maybe find who she was a little bit?
So we filmed this in 2020. So
Wow.
we filmed it before she came out with her book. And I only could do the research that I had through the internet, but Matthew was really great about it because he said, we're not filming a documentary. This is not like a real telling of what happened. This is fictional. And it's a story about this man and what he did and the intrigue that Matthew had in it and from the different perspectives. So it was really just about drawing upon humanness and upon the complexity of human experience in some of the worst situations with the people we love the most. And so I didn't have those tools. And it was okay because what I did have was lots of people's theories and I guess my own judgments as well. Going to a most wanted list and seeing a man who was next to Osama bin Laden and thinking that you could ever compare the two was my own judgment, like where you find yourself saying really terrible things like, well, he only killed one person. And, this guy, and you're like, oh my gosh, like you're judging yourself for, ranking who's better than who or who's worse than who. And kind of taking those feelings and infusing them into a character that had their own personal love and connection and the same blood as somebody who's capable of this and what that complexity would feel like. I really remember filming the scene with Tom where he's packing up and I come home after seeing the news and just getting to sink our teeth into what that scene was. And the same with, playing the scene with Jackie Weaver, my mom, and not wanting to turn my brother in because it's your brother. And it's hard because my Chantal brain thinks, what the F? He did this murder. You have to turn him in. But the human sister love bond side is so much more complex and interesting. And that's why I do what I do, is to play those shades of gray. And um, whether or not that's truthful to how she felt, it was just the story that we kind of ultimately decided we wanted to convey about family and love.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And I think the relationships are so important in this film. And of course, we do see Jason from so many different perspectives. And in Jamie's case, they have a very loving and I think quite complex relationship from their childhood. So, did you and Tom actually get a chance to talk much about that? Or were you very much just thrown into the deep end? You had the script and just found that chemistry on set?
No, we got really lucky because when I signed on to it, I told Matthew, like, I'm not leading this movie, but there is something really important here about family, especially considering the story of their father and the fact that their father, was a con artist and in trouble with the law and disappeared. That there was a story within the story that in so few scenes that I understand, but we needed to make sure we conveyed. So we got to kind of dive in and we did some chemistry Zoom reads because it was still COVID times of quarantining for a while before we started shooting. And we got to kind of, Tom and I over Zoom just start to work it out and talk it out. And so when we actually saw each other on set, it just fell into everything so nicely because we had these times to talk about the relationship ahead of time. And I mean, Tom is incredible, and that was a really big factor for why I wanted to do the film as well. Not only Matthew's like passion and investment in writing it and directing it, and following this story since he was young, but also just working with somebody like Tom, who is like all in immersive, and I work in much the same way. And it's like theater. You're just there and present for 14 hours of playing and digging and discovering.
Oh, how fantastic. And I know for you, emotionally, you get really put through the ringer in this film. As you said, the scene with Jamie's mum, and then obviously with everything with Jason. So, what's it like for you to get into her mindset in those moments? And would you say those were the most perhaps challenging aspects of this role for you?
Yeah, of course, but they're the motivating drive for why I wanted to do it, because I always say I want to take the roles that scare the shit out of me, that are more complicated, that I find myself judging and maybe wanting to back away from, and instead really leaning into that place of fear because that's where we grow. That's where we understand human experiences. I've been in real life therapy for long enough because of my own family dysfunction to understand and be able to use that coming to the table. And, we have as actors a toolbox of experiences. And when we can use them to gain insight and understanding and play through a character, our own experiences, it only makes it more worthwhile.
Absolutely. And Tom, I spoke to a couple of weeks ago. He's a lovely guy, but obviously as Jason, not so much. But with you, on the other hand, of course, as Jamie, he is quite a caring brother on the surface. So when you got to see the film, did it almost shock you to see some of the places Tom went, like the scenes with both your mother, for example?
I'm trying to think of the right word. Yeah, yes and no, because I think I knew the nature of the person that he wanted to be, that the film portrays him wanting to be, and then the person that he found himself being. And the best stories, like taking this away from being a documentary about Jason and being a story about a murderer, is it's really complicated. People are not always just one thing. You can be a good brother, you can be a wonderful husband, and you could also be a murderer. And so both can exist. And we forget quite often that we are not only our worst days. And of course, we have a reckoning to deal with when we create crimes and murders, and no part of me is condoning that. What I'm saying is that internally, we can be conflicted, and he could still be a good brother. So I knew that in this portrayal of him, that there was a doting boyfriend, a loving brother, a party guy. There's also a murderer. And I don't think that those things exist within every human, but it's really interesting to try to understand, because I don't think unless you're capable of those things, it's something that you can really fathom. But what I can fathom is the human experience of allowing everything to exist at once and allowing all of those black and white lines that we can judge from our own perspective of not being murderers to be blurred, and to tell a really interesting and dynamic and nuanced story.
Yeah, well, fantastic job of that. And of course, as you said, you didn't have Jamie on hand to get into her mind. So for you as the actor, obviously inhabiting this character, why do you think, what's your take on why in that moment she lies for him and she protects him? You know, as you said, she's seen the news, she knows what he's done at this point. So what was your sort of perspective on that? And obviously having to portray that on screen then?
I mean, it's love.
Hmm.
That's love. Love is so complicated. We want to think that love means we're always going to do the right thing, and that love is pure, and that it's not muddled, but it is. And love makes us do the wrong thing sometimes. And, it's like villains in stories. Villains are usually misunderstood, and those are the best ones, are the ones that you can see pieces of yourself in, because that's terrifying, to think that you're not this wonderful human being who's always making the best, possible choices, and that love would always lead you to do the right thing, but it's just not the truth. And what I search for in being a creative individual is truth. And my truth is, well, let's say my own sister, with how deeply I love her. I mean, like, whole nother level of love. If she did something bad, I couldn't imagine that I would just do the right thing without some sort of conflict. And that conflict is really interesting to sink your teeth into, and also to make other people think about.
Yeah,
It's easy to judge. It's easy to sit
absolutely.
back and think, well, I would have, if only she did this, and instead to think, what's the human story here? What's the real truth behind this? And just to tell it without judgment, without worrying what the audience is going to think.
So well said. And yeah, I completely agree with you. And just on another note, I actually finished watching For All Mankind for the first time last week and fell in love with the show and fell in love with Karen. And then, of course, get to that finale. And unfortunately, Karen is no more. So were you disappointed that the story ended there? Or do you think it was the right time to maybe end that arc for her?
I'm never disappointed in that show.
Hmm.
Never. I knew when I signed on that we all would be passing the baton in the relay race. That show will keep living on. It's the fourth season is being filmed now, and it's such a beautiful idea to watch things evolve based on the foundation of characters that we got to play, whether it be Tracy, Gordo, Karen, Molly. They're worked into the fabric of that show, and they are what that show was constructed on and about. And so I don't have fear that, I mean, I know also what happens in scripts because I'm friends with people, but I didn't have fear that it wasn't Karen's time, because we don't get to choose. Sometimes we go at the height of our life. It could be like you're on the precipice of everything in front of you, and it was your time. And that's where the story ends. And I really truly felt like I surrendered from day one to whatever story that we wanted to tell. And it was this beautiful 3-season swan song of watching a housewife who then learned that you can't just caregive your whole life and still feel fulfilled, and finding her own voice and her own feet. And she did so much in her lifetime. And 63 is far too young to pass away in my mind, but the impact that also gets left behind in a legacy by sometimes going too early is a whole nother version of an experience of a character or a human. And I will forever be changed and grateful because of that show. Um, like my soul lives in those scenes and through Karen for a lot of reasons. And I'm only sad because I miss my friends, and we were a very close cast. But yeah, it was my time, and if everybody wanted me to go, I wasn't doing my job. If everybody was like, "Thank God she's gone," we would not be sitting here talking.
Oh, it was a fantastic arc. And just one final question for you,
Yeah.
Chantel. Obviously, it's Halloween, so happy Halloween to you. But I have to ask, what is your favorite horror film?
Oh, goodness me, oh my. I do not watch horror films. I don't like Halloween. Like, so the last horror film I watched was so long ago. It was 28 Days Later.
Hmm.
Like, how many years ago? What, probably 16, 17, like, and still to this day, if I'm on the ground floor in the middle of the woods and I walk by a window, I think I'm going to see somebody with like red beady eyes that comes to the window still to this day. Like, I have too vivid of an imagination to sit through horror. Like Stranger Things was like a horror film to me. So, that was the last one I ever watched, and I could never name a favorite because I hate them all.
Oh, what a great answer. Well, Chantel, thank you so much for talking to me
Thank you
today.
so much, Josh, of
Loved
course.
you in this film, The Flash, The Boys,
Oh,
For
you're so
Mankind.
sweet.
What a
Thank you.
great list of credits. So thank you again.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Have a lovely day.
Okay, bye.